All right, so are you ready to dive into something pretty thought-provoking today?
Always ready.
Okay, great. You guys sent us this YouTube video, and we wanted to take a deep dive into it.
No, yeah.
It's called Before God Uses You, He Will Give You These 7 Tests
Okay.
by David Diga Hernandez. And in it, he lays out these 7 tests that he believes God uses to, well, refine us and prepare us for our purpose.
Yeah.
He uses the story of Joseph from the Bible to kind of illustrate these different tests. So I'm curious to get your take on this. Have you heard of these 7 tests before?
Yeah, I have. I'm familiar with the story of Joseph, and a lot of preachers use that story as kind of a prototype for how God works in our lives.
Okay. So for those who maybe aren't as familiar with the story, can you give us a quick recap of who Joseph is and why his story is so relevant to this topic?
Yeah, so Joseph was one of 12 sons, and he was kind of the favorite son. His father gave him this coat of many colors, and his brothers were jealous of him.
Yep.
And, they ended up selling him into slavery, and he went through a lot of trials and tribulations.
So basically his life was a whole series of tests, even before we get to these 7 specific ones.
You could say that. But he persevered through all of it, and in the end, he was elevated to a position of power, and he was able to save his family from famine. And so a lot of people see that story as a metaphor for how God can take us through difficult seasons in our lives and use those experiences to shape us and prepare us for something greater.
So it's not just about the tests themselves, it's about how we respond to those tests and what we learn along the way.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's jump into these 7 tests. Hernandez starts with test #1, which is service. And I'm curious, it can't just be about, volunteering at the soup kitchen or something. What does he mean by service in this context?
Yeah, it's more about having a servant's heart. It's about being willing to serve others, even when it's not glamorous, even when it's difficult, and even when people don't appreciate it. Think about Joseph, right? He was literally sold into slavery by his own brothers, and yet he still found a way to serve them and forgive them. That's a pretty high bar. So Hernandez is saying that true service is about having that same kind of humility and selflessness.
I'm sensing a theme here already, and we're only on test #1. It seems like these tests are really about character development, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. They're about refining our motives, our attitudes, and our actions. It's about becoming the kind of person that God can use to make a difference in the world.
So it's not about what we do, it's about who we are becoming through the process.
Exactly.
Okay, so test #2 is hiddenness. And this one seems a little mysterious. I mean, wouldn't God want us to be out there, sharing our faith, making a difference? What's the point of being hidden?
Right. Well, Hernandez uses the example of Joseph being thrown into that cistern, that deep pit, completely hidden away from the world. And he suggests that God sometimes hides us for our own protection or to purify our motives. Maybe we're not ready for the spotlight yet. Maybe we need some time to grow and mature. He even shares his own experience of starting a blog that nobody read. He was pouring his heart into it, but it felt like nobody cared. But he kept writing because he felt like it was what God had called him to do. And eventually that blog led to other opportunities, but it started in obscurity.
So it's like a seed being planted, right? It needs time to germinate before it can sprout and grow.
Exactly. And sometimes those hidden seasons are the most important times of growth, even though they might feel frustrating or discouraging at the time.
Which leads us perfectly into test #3, right? Discouragement. I mean, let's be real, nobody's immune to this. How does Hernandez address this seemingly inevitable part of the journey?
Yeah, he's actually very candid about his own struggles with discouragement. He talks about losing friends, facing criticism, even dealing with slander. He says that discouragement is part of the process, but it doesn't have to define us. He uses this powerful analogy. He compares it to crushing olives to get the oil. The crushing itself doesn't produce the oil, it just reveals what was already inside.
Whoa, I never thought of it like that. So the trials we face don't necessarily create our character, they reveal it.
Exactly. And that's a really encouraging thought. It means that even in the midst of our struggles, there's something valuable inside of us, something that's being refined and purified.
It makes you want to ask, what have my trials revealed about me?
It's a good question to ask ourselves, and it can help us to reframe our perspective on those difficult seasons.
So we've talked about service, hiddenness, and discouragement. So far, these tests seem less like, pop quizzes and more like intense training.
Yeah, it's like a boot camp for the soul.
All right, so what's test #4?
Test #4 is faithfulness.
Okay, that makes sense. But what does he mean by faithfulness? Is it just about, showing up every day and doing what you're supposed to do?
Well, he uses the example of Joseph again. This time, he's talking about Joseph's success in Potiphar's house. Even though Joseph was a slave, he was faithful in everything he did, and as a result, he was promoted to a position of authority.
So it's not just about showing up, it's about excelling in whatever you're doing.
Right. He calls it excellence over time. It's about consistently bringing your best, even when you're dealing with difficult circumstances or tasks that you might consider beneath you.
Okay, so it's about the attitude, the commitment to doing your best, even when nobody's watching.
Exactly.
That makes me think about my own life. Where am I cutting corners? Where am I not giving my best effort? What if I approach every task, every interaction, with that same spirit of faithfulness and excellence? Would it change the results I get?
It's definitely something to think about.
It's almost like these tests are building on each other, right? Like you can't really be faithful if you haven't gone through those seasons of hiddenness and discouragement.
It's like a staircase. Each step prepares you for the next.
Okay, so we're halfway through these tests. What's test #5?
All right, this one might seem a little counterintuitive. Test #5 is blessings.
Wait, hold on. Blessings as a test. How does that work?
Well, think about it. What happens when things are going well in our lives? It's easy to get comfortable, complacent, even a little entitled. Hernandez suggests that God sometimes gives us blessings just to see how we'll react. Will we become more grateful and generous, or will we become prideful and selfish?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I've definitely noticed that when things are going well, it's easy to take things for granted.
He also uses the example of Potiphar's wife. Remember, she tried to seduce Joseph, and when he refused, she falsely accused him, and he ended up in prison. So even though Joseph was doing the right thing, he still faced consequences.
So it's like, even when we're being blessed, there can still be challenges and temptations. And how we handle those situations reveals our true character.
Exactly. The test is not about whether we experience blessings or not. It's about how we respond to those blessings and whether they draw us closer to God or lead us away from Him.
So we've got to be careful not to let those blessings become idols in our lives.
Right. It's about keeping our priorities straight and remembering that our ultimate purpose is not about comfort or success. It's about serving God and others.
Okay, this is getting pretty deep. We've covered 5 tests so far.
What are the last 2?
Well, the next one is jealousy.
Oh, jealousy. That's a big one. I think we've all struggled with that at some point, especially in this age of social media where everyone's always comparing themselves to others.
Yeah, it's so easy to fall into that trap. And Hernandez doesn't shy away from this topic. He talks about how he's even seen jealousy play out among pastors and ministers.
Wow, so it's not just a regular people problem. Nope, it affects everyone. And he challenges us to ask ourselves, how do we respond when someone else is blessed with what we've been praying for?
That's a tough one.
Yeah, it is. But his answer is simple yet profound. Crucify your ego.
So it's about recognizing that God's abundance is limitless. He can bless multiple people at the same time without diminishing anyone else's portion.
Exactly. Our sense of lack often stems from a scarcity mindset. But when we shift to an abundance mindset, we can genuinely celebrate others' wins without feeling threatened. We can recognize that their success doesn't take away from our own potential.
That's a great reminder. It's so easy to get caught up in that comparison game and start feeling resentful or envious. But what if we chose to see other people's successes as inspiration instead of competition?
That's a great way to put it. And Hernandez actually encourages us to go a step further. He says that one of the best ways to combat jealousy is to actually bless the person you're feeling jealous of. Pray for them, celebrate their achievements. It's a powerful way to shift your perspective.
I love that. So we've talked about service, hiddenness, discouragement, faithfulness, blessings, and now jealousy. I'm sensing a theme here. These tests are really about character development, aren't they?
You got it. And that leads us to the final test, the culmination of all the others, the test of faith.
Okay, so this is where it all comes together.
Yeah.
What does Hernandez have to say about faith?
Well, he uses the story of Joseph interpreting Pharaoh's dream to illustrate this test. Here's Joseph, a man who's been through the ringer, betrayed, enslaved, falsely accused, imprisoned. Yet when the opportunity arises, he steps up with confidence and interprets the dream, leading to his ultimate rise to power.
It's almost like all those previous tests prepared him for this moment.
Yeah.
Like he wouldn't have been able to handle the weight of that responsibility without having gone through everything he did.
That's exactly it. It's a beautiful illustration of how God uses our trials to equip us for our purpose. And it's a powerful reminder that sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come when we dare to step outside our comfort zones and trust God, even when we don't have all the answers.
But taking that leap of faith can be so scary. How do we know when it's the right time? How do we overcome that fear and just do it?
Hernandez says sometimes the quickest way to get unstuck is to simply take action, to do what you believe you're called to do, even when the outcome is uncertain.
It's like that saying, leap and the net will appear. But that takes a lot of trust, doesn't it?
It does, and he admits that it's not always easy. But he encourages us to remember that God is faithful and that he will never lead us astray if we're truly seeking his will.
This is making me think about all the times I've hesitated to take a step of faith because I was afraid of failing or looking foolish. What if I'd just gone for it?
We'll never know unless we try. But I think it's safe to say that more often than not, when we step out in faith, God honors that, even if it doesn't look exactly the way we expected.
This is all so insightful. I feel like we've barely scratched the surface of these 7 tests. I'm definitely going to need some time to process all of this.
Me too. It's a lot to take in. But I think it's a message that we all need to hear, especially in the times we're living in.
Okay, so we've talked about service, hiddenness, discouragement, faithfulness, blessings, jealousy, and now faith. 7 tests that God uses to prepare us for our purpose. What are some of the key takeaways that you hope listeners will glean from this deep dive?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that the journey is just as important as the destination. These tests are not meant to punish us or break us down. They're meant to shape us, refine us, and prepare us for something greater.
And that even when we're going through difficult seasons, there's always hope. God is always working behind the scenes, even when we can't see it.
And I think it's also important to remember that we're not alone in this. We all face challenges, we all experience doubts and fears, but we can encourage one another and help each other to stay the course.
This has been such a rich conversation. I feel like I've learned so much already.
Me too. It's been a pleasure.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into David Diga Hernandez's "Before God Uses You, He Will Give You These 7 Tests." But there's still so much more to unpack. We're going to continue this conversation in our next episode. So be sure to tune in as we explore the practical implications of these tests and how we can apply them to our own lives.
Looking forward to it.
Until then, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep seeking, keep growing, and keep the faith.
And keep those questions coming.
See you next time.
Bye. You know, it's interesting how he talks about how, for our own protection, God will only expose us in proportion to the purity of our motives.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It really makes you think.
It does. It makes you question, like, is my desire for success or recognition, is that hindering my true purpose? You know, like if I'm not internally prepared for the responsibility that comes with having a larger platform, it could actually be detrimental.
Right. It's like if your motives aren't pure, you might not be able to handle the pressure or the temptation that comes with success.
So those seemingly small acts of service, like what we were talking about earlier, those are actually more important than we think. It's in those hidden seasons that we develop the integrity and the resilience, the genuine love for what we're doing, and that's what ultimately makes us effective when the time is right.
Exactly. It's like building a house. You don't start with the roof. You lay a strong foundation first. And sometimes that foundation is laid in obscurity, away from the spotlight. But it's absolutely essential for the stability and longevity of the structure.
That reminds me of something else Hernandez talks about in the video, about how tricky our own motives can be. He shares an example of how he used to pray, "Lord, I don't care if you ever promote me," thinking that by saying that, God would be more likely to elevate him.
Yeah, I've totally been there.
It's funny, but it also reveals how easily we can deceive ourselves. It highlights the importance of being self-aware and honest with ourselves about why we're doing what we're doing.
Right, like is it for the approval of others, or is it because we genuinely want to serve and make a difference?
And he also points out that sometimes God does allow people to be promoted quickly, even if their motives aren't pure. But he suggests that this can actually be a form of judgment, because if they haven't gone through the necessary refining process, they're more likely to crumble under the pressure.
That's a sobering thought. It's a good reminder that true success is not about external validation, but about internal alignment with our values and our purpose. It's about becoming the kind of person who can handle the responsibility that comes with influence.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground so far with these tests. Service, hiddenness, discouragement, faithfulness. Now we're on to the test of blessings. I still find this concept so intriguing.
It is fascinating, isn't it? This idea that blessings can be a test.
It seems counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But when you think about it, it makes sense. Because when things are going well, it's easy to get comfortable and maybe a little complacent.
Exactly. And Hernandez suggests that God sometimes gives us blessings just to see how we'll react when he takes them away. Like, will we become bitter and resentful, or will we remain grateful and humble, recognizing that everything we have is a gift?
He even shares an example of how God instructed him to give away all of his camera equipment. That must have been a huge step of faith for him.
It was, but it's amazing how, After he obeyed, even though it was difficult, the blessings multiplied.
It's like that saying, sometimes you have to let go of what's good to make room for what's great.
Exactly. This test of blessings is about recognizing that our true security comes from our identity in Christ, not from our possessions or achievements, or even our ministry.
So it's not about accumulating stuff or chasing after fleeting pleasures. It's about finding fulfillment in aligning with our purpose and using our blessings to bless others.
Exactly. And that brings us to the next test, jealousy. Something I think a lot of people struggle with, especially in today's social media-driven world.
Oh, absolutely. It's so easy to get caught up in comparing ourselves to others, seeing their highlight reels and feeling inadequate. And Hernandez doesn't shy away from this. He even talks about how he's witnessed jealousy and competition play out among other ministers.
He asks a really thought-provoking question. How do you respond when someone else is blessed with what you've been praying for?
Oof, that one hits close to home.
It does. And Hernandez's answer to that is simple yet profound. Crucify your ego.
He's saying that we need to recognize that God's abundance is limitless. He can bless multiple people at the same time without diminishing anyone else's portion.
Right. Our sense of lack often stems from a scarcity mindset, but when we shift to an abundance mindset, we can genuinely celebrate others' wins without feeling threatened. We can recognize that their success doesn't take away from our own potential.
And he actually gives a really great example of this. He talks about how he's been in green rooms with other preachers, and notice how easily ego can get stirred up. But he's learned to combat that by praying for those individuals, blessing them, even if he's feeling a twinge of jealousy.
Oh, it's powerful, isn't it? Instead of letting jealousy fester, he chooses to transform it into a blessing. It's a reminder that we always have a choice in how we respond to those challenging emotions.
And that brings us to the final test, the test of faith. This is where Joseph takes that courageous step to interpret Pharaoh's dream, even though it could have cost him his life. It's a reminder that sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come when we dare to step outside our comfort zones and trust God, even when the outcome is uncertain.
Hernandez encourages us to ask ourselves, what step of faith is God calling me to take right now? What's that thing we've been putting off because it feels too risky or scary? What if that leap of faith is actually the key to unlocking the next level of our journey?
Yeah, it's so easy to get stuck in that, like, analysis paralysis, waiting for the perfect moment or the perfect plan. But what if the real key is just, like, taking that first step?
I think Hernandez would agree with you there. He actually says that sometimes the quickest way to get unstuck is to simply do what you feel called to do. Even if you don't fully understand the plan or see the path clearly laid out, it's about trusting that God is working behind the scenes even when it doesn't feel like it.
And trusting the process even when it's messy and uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Which, can kind of brings us back to those hidden seasons that we were talking about earlier, how those times are so crucial for, like, purifying our motives.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're working behind the scenes, there's no audience, no applause. You're doing it because you truly believe in it.
That's where the real growth happens, right? When we're stripped of all those external distractions and motivations, that's when we discover who we really are and what we're truly made of.
It's like the difference between fool's gold and the real deal. The refining fire reveals the true substance. And, sometimes even when we are being faithful and we are trying our best, we still face criticism, even from other believers. Hernandez mentions that, he's seen how jealousy and competition can actually, like, tear down rather than build up.
Yeah, it's a sad reality. But it's a reminder that we're all human, right? We all have insecurities and struggles, even within the church. It's a call for us to, practice grace and compassion, not just with those outside the faith, but with our brothers and sisters in Christ, too.
It's a good reminder that our true validation comes from God, not from people. Mm-hmm. We can't control what other people say or think about us, but we can control our own thoughts and reactions and choices.
So if you're facing criticism or opposition right now, just remember that your worth isn't defined by the opinions of others. Stay focused on your purpose, on the calling you believe you've received, and trust that God will work things out in His time.
One of the biggest takeaways for me from this whole deep dive has been Hernandez's emphasis on perseverance. It's not enough to just have faith. We have to actively put that faith into action, even when it's hard, even when we feel like giving up.
Yeah, he actually says persistence doesn't even begin until you feel like giving up. It's in those moments of doubt and discouragement that our true character is tested. That's when we decide if we're going to rise to the challenge or crumble under pressure.
It's like planting a seed. You don't see the sprout immediately.
Yeah.
It takes time and nurturing and patience for it to break through the soil and blossom.
So if you're in a season of waiting right now, if you're feeling discouraged or tempted to give up, just Remember that God is working behind the scenes. Your efforts are not in vain. Keep watering those seeds, keep nurturing your dreams, and trust that in God's perfect timing you will see the harvest.
We started this deep dive exploring Hernandez's message through the lens of Joseph's story. But as we've been talking, I've realized that this isn't just about Joseph. It's about all of us. We all face these tests in different ways, in different seasons of our lives.
It's like the hero's journey, isn't it? And I think that's what makes Hernandez's message so powerful and relatable. He's speaking from his own experience, sharing his struggles, and how he's learned to navigate these challenges to come out stronger on the other side.
And that's what this whole deep dive has been about.
Right.
Recognizing that the journey itself is the teacher. Embracing the challenges, learning from our setbacks, and ultimately becoming the best versions of ourselves.
Beautifully said. And I think that's the perfect note to end on. Remember, you're not alone on this journey. We all face tests. We all experience seasons of growth and refinement. Just keep pressing forward, keep trusting the process, and let God's grace guide you every step of the way. You got this.
This has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today.
It's been my pleasure.
And to all of you listening out there, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this has been encouraging and challenging for you. Remember to keep seeking, keep growing, and keep the faith.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.